nice to be here. I'm doing the intro today. So we are a live podcast centered around British traditional witchcraft. We are on episode 3 of season 6. So this is my 3rd season, and you guys did 3 seasons before I came on. So at season 6, episode 3, we are Alexandrian High Priesthood, and we run covens in New Orleans. We also teach and help the community build great witchcraft. We are Ellie Barnes. I'm a psychic and medium at Hex, and I also co-lead the New Orleans Coven with Brian Kane. Levi Rowland runs a Alexandrian Coven, and he is the author of 2 books, Mother and the Art Cosmic. He is a famous linguist and academic. And Brian Kane is our fearless leader, and the brainchild of Brian is Covendom. This is his idea, his creation. He's high priest of the New Orleans Coven. He owns, along with his husband, Hex and Omens in New Orleans and Salem, and runs all of the festivals and events related to Warlocks, Inc. in Salem and New Orleans. Brian Kane, that's us. We're High Priesthood. The format of our show, watch us on Hex Education is our platform. Watch us on Facebook and YouTube. YouTube's really the better view. It's more streaming, I think. And it's very important that you could like us for this show and subscribe to the Hex Education YouTube channel so you can keep up with what we're doing and how outspoken we are. Thank you. The format tonight, I'm doing the introduction. I'm going to hand it over to Brian, who's going to do news and demonstration. And we're going to be ambush interviewed by a famous high priestess, Tracy Frasche. And she comes on with secret questions. None of us know what it is. Mm-mm. And we start having to answer and discuss. And then we open it up to calls. And we really want you guys to call us and ask us some great questions because Tracy will be answering also. She runs a coven in North Carolina, Gardnerian High Priestess, and she'll tell us more about herself at the end of the broadcast. Call in when we invite you to 1-309-463-3377. Turning it over to Brian Kane.
Hello. So I'm just doing the news thing. Levi will be doing our occult demonstration.
I got you.
So some things coming up. Obviously, we all have Hexfest coming up, and that is the 9th through the 11th, but it starts out on the 8th with an Alexandrian soiree at Potions, which is above Fritzel's, and that's going to be amazing. It's a grand soiree, so it's actually Ellie, Levi, myself, and Christine Stevens are hosting it, along with the Pontchartrain, New Orleans, and Salem covens. So that's going to be an amazing night to get us all in the mood for a weekend of witchery. My book is coming out on August 1st, so it will be there for the attendees at Hexfest. And if you find me at Hexfest, you can get a signed copy. Levi will also be there as well as some other authors who can sign copies for your books there. So if you have not purchased your tickets to Hexfest, do so now. Time is running short. It is such a wonderful weekend. We start out with a riverboat cruise where we have dinner and we do a ritual dedicated to Isis as the goddess of rivers. And so we sort of are looking at Mississippi as being the Nile of America, which it really is. And we have so many workshops and classes that it's just one of my favorite things to do, and we appreciate your support. So news of the world, right? So there's a few things, and I am going to get a little political, but it's not like my main thing to get political. And I totally, I brought myself a little cheat sheet, and I grabbed the wrong piece of paper. So see, this is why paper doesn't work out, Ellie.
Paper?
So
paper.
I have to go. So from that. So one thing is happening, and I might get this a bit wrong because I didn't bring my note, but there is actually a festival that's going to be going on in August in Connecticut celebrating the witch trials. I believe it's Hartford. I think Hartford is where it is. And so they have, their courts there have done an honorary thing to, what do you call when you...
Exonerate?
Yes, exonerate the witches of Connecticut. And the reason they're doing it is to bring attention to the fact that there were witch trials in Connecticut, which there were quite a few. So most people think it all happened here in Salem, Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. We were most famous here in Salem. So it's happened in other places as well, which we've talked about. Some other things I want to talk about is the Wild Hunt has an article that it mentioned that you can go and look at. And I think this segues into the politics, which this isn't a political show, but I think because this is about witchcraft, I think it's important that I'm going to talk a little bit about the conservative right Jesus-inspired nationalist movement. I'm watching my words carefully. You all know what I'm talking about. So it's not what I would actually call real Christianity, but it is a phenomenon that's really big in America. It's very much linked to politics. It always has been. And it is a movement that wants to have political control. It's not any different really than radical Muslims. If they had the ability to act in the same manner, they would, right? That's my personal belief. So in the Wild Hunt, they have an article about how that movement is now calling Kamala Harris a witch, and that's one of their big mediums, which they did before as well when she was running with Joe Biden as vice president. And they did it to Hillary Clinton too. It is actually a standard maneuver because some of their followers aren't the brightest crayons in the box. So if they can convince them that this person is in the occult or they're a witch, that they're evil, basically. It's misogynistic, it's demoralizing, it's manipulation at its finest. And I think we should be very conscious of it because the fact that politically that is still being used as a negative thing.
Yep.
So segueing into that, you can look this up for yourselves. Donald Trump at a convention for nationalist Jesus people actually publicly stated to them that in the next 4 years they wouldn't have to vote anymore. That it was going to be so fixed that they wouldn't have to vote anymore. And he talked about how he loved the Christians and they wouldn't have to vote ever again. So it's very scary. So I do encourage people to vote. And Christian and I, at the last election, put out witches should vote. We are a minority, obviously, but these people, regardless of where your stance is, Republican or Democrat, it's not even really about that. It's about the fact that these people are dangerous to witchcraft. They simply are. Yes, they're going to go for abortion, they're going to go for gay rights and things like that first. But if they get all of that, how many witch shops and witchcraft festivals and witchcraft churches do you think are really going to survive? Zero. Right? So if they actually got the kind of power where we're no longer having elections. So let's all be very mindful and conscious. I think we really are sort of fighting for democracy in this upcoming election. And when you cast your vote, I think you should keep that in mind, regardless of what you think about anyone. And remember, it's not about who you like. It's about who you think is going to do the best job for America, right? So that's a thing to consider. So that's my news segment for there was one little other thing that actually just came my way that I wasn't planning on mentioning, but I'm going to mention it because I didn't look into this, but some of you've probably encountered it. So there was an Olympics performance in France, and it featured the Greek gods. And the same people we're talking about are up in arms. Because it's paganism and it's the old gods and everything like that. Well, it's the Olympics, which is centered around the old Greek gods. It used to be a pagan event, so it's kind of ironic. So if you didn't get the memo, everyone, the reason why they might have included this is because it's the Olympics.
Yeah.
But anyway, there is a fight. There is a focus on paganism and witchcraft. They do know we're here. They are aware, right? So anyway, that's my news segment for this week. And I'm going to pass it on to Levi for the occult demonstration.
Sure. So mine is going to start with something that's more educational, like kind of historical, but I do have like more practical information about. I've been going down a deep dive recently about art and the occult. And what's really spurred that, and it's been going on for quite some time, my husband is an artist, and so I'm very indebted to him for really opening my eyes to lots of new art. But I'm almost done with this fantastic biography of Hilma of Klint by Julia Voss. Hilma af Klint was an incredible expressionist painter from Sweden who was a theosophist, and then she eventually was more Rudolf Steiner anthroposophy influenced. And she's interesting because she's a part of something that's going on in art history that I think witches and occultists should know about, which is if you took any classes on art history in college, or even if you just read articles about art history or whatever, when it got to the modernists, and Ellie knows a lot more than I do about art, so feel free to chime in, but like, when you got to the modern abstract expressionists, for a long time, it was painted as a sort of boys' club and understood almost entirely through psychoanalysis. It was very secular. They were man's fight against the self and man's fight against nature, and it's all Freudian and whatnot. That's a very tiny and weird way to look at the history of modern art. The simple fact is, and what's coming out in a lot of these books by art historians, the simple fact is that an enormous amount of the revolutions in modern art came from female occultists.
Yes.
And it's very cool. And I'm going to throw some names out that you can look up. We're in the age of Google, so I don't need to put them on screen or type them. But some of the most important figures you can look up in this history are Hilma af Klint, who I'm going to talk about a little bit more in a second. She's my favorite of the group, but there's also Remedios Varo, Leonora Carrington, Eiffel Colloon, Georgiana Houghton, or Georgiana Houghton, I've heard it pronounced both ways. She was a spiritualist artist that predates all of these people, actually. Agnes Pelton, and of course Pamela Coleman Smith, who did the Rider-Waite Tarot, but she's more representational art. But all of those names, you can review and look them up, are incredible female artists that were sort of written out of the canon at the time when they were painting. Hilma af Klint actually wrote in her will that she wanted her paintings to be sealed away for 50 years because they wouldn't be appreciated in her current time. She was very, very educated in the occult. She actually ran an occult group inspired by Rosicrucianism. Remedios Varo was inspired by folk witchcraft and the tarot. Agnes Pelton was a transcendentalist. It's just so many. And all of these books are coming out that show that these women were painting this stuff long before the men that are praised as the sort of founders of abstract expressionism. Mm-hmm. And we're finding out that this sort of hatred that a lot of art historians had for the occult, or especially for theosophy, they sort of downplayed it, was massively important, even for a lot of male artists like Kandinsky, who was a theosophist. Mm-hmm. And so was Mondrian. Mm-hmm. And you don't hear that in your art history classes anymore because they're kind of ashamed of it. They want to pretend that these artists were not the spiritual seekers that they were.
Or communists sometimes.
Exactly.
And things like that they wash over today.
And so outside of that, if you want a quick, smaller intro that's a little bit more of a piece, I really recommend this book called The Art of the Occult. The Art of the Occult, it's edited by S. Elizabeth, and it's subtitled A Visual Source Book for the Modern Mystic. And a lot of the artists I talked about, like Remedios Varo and Eiffel Colloon and whatnot, are in this book, along with Hilma.
Who's the publisher for that book?
This one is White Lion.
White Lion
Publishing.
Eiffel Colloon. I always wondered whether it was Colquhoun or Colhoun.
It's Eiffel Colloon. I had to look it up.
Was a huge financier and benefactor to the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn.
Yes.
She wasn't a member. I really recently learned this. Wasn't a member, but she did a lot of art, and they were all... Well, I think that's true really as a comment about women painters. They didn't have a foothold at all until the modern time period.
And they're getting so much coverage now.
It was only
so many
men.
specials, books, retrospectives, museums opening up and realizing the truth of this. So on the more practical side, I actually think that occult art and art in general is one of the best ways to get yourself out of slumps in practice. Visualizing great art, investigating the symbolism that was used. It's our symbolism, guys. If you're fluent in astrology, if you're fluent in the Western occult tradition, you can investigate some of these artists and you will be blown away by how it can open up new things in your practice. Because the fact is I think a lot of modern occultists are book-only people. And, after a while, you can get burnt out on text. And I really do think visual culture can be an incredible teaching method for magic. And so I highly recommend, if you're in a slump in your practice or you're wanting to open yourself up to something new, investigate some of these transgressive female occult artists and see where it leads you. Because you'd be surprised how deep down the rabbit hole you can go of symbolism in witchcraft, theosophy, anthroposophy, Rosicrucian thought, all of it. So yeah, find some occult artists, go down a rabbit hole, you'll love it.
Frida Kahlo, too. We got to remember her. She's not quite the occultist, but she certainly did the psychological analysis pretty deeply, right, in her work.
Yeah, that is my...
person that is going to be in my book that fits this theme is Rosalind Norton. Mm-hmm. She's not nearly famous as the others, but really her huge contribution was her art. You should look it up.
Yeah, Rosalind Norton's a great example of that, the Australian artist. There's such a renaissance right now going on around these occult female artists. So
Very nice.
It's very cool. So I'm going to bring on Miss Tracy Frasche.
Frasche.
Blessed be, Tracy. Welcome to Covendom.
Blessed be, blessed Covendom. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Ellie. I love that. I don't know about famous, but crazy is true.
We're famous.
So, I was listening to Brian's talk about the Alexandrian soiree, and he mentioned two E words: entitlement, and what was the other one, Brian?
Expectation.
And expectations. I'm like going, okay, Brian's using E words. I'm starting to worry. So, do you want the topic?
Yes, please.
Are you ready for this? Are you hanging on your edge of your seat? So, the topic is the role of ego in witchcraft.
Oof. Speak about Freudian.
So, do you want the first question?
Please. I'm done.
And let me ask you this: are you going to fight it out amongst yourselves, or do you want me to pick someone to?
You're in charge, Tracy.
Go first.
You'll pick who answers each time.
Well, I'll answer it, but you pick what order it goes in.
Okay, so in the world of traditional witchcraft, where does ego live? How do you define ego, and how does it manifest within your practice? And I'll start with Levi.
Ooh. This is one of those things where I think of a John Waters quote. I love John Waters, the filmmaker who did that. Yeah, Pink Flamingos and everything. He said, to understand bad taste, you have to have very good taste. And I think to understand the dissolution of the ego in the great work, you have to first have a very well-established one. So it's a bit of a catch-22. I think to work magic and to be a successful leader in a coven, or even a participant, because we're all initiates in the craft, we have a very horizontal kind of experience when the magic is happening. It's not hierarchical the way occultism often is in other orders. So you do have to have a very well-established magical ego, but then, part of the great work is the transformation of that, the reflection of it against the gods, right? So that the self and the higher self are kind of in that constant communion that at the highest moments of ecstasy can collapse into one, right? And that's the goal of mystical union. But that's very hard to do if you don't have a developed magical ego. So I think that's why the occult has always been difficult for people, and why we have our past is littered with sort of egomaniacal failures, frankly, is because they went too far in that direction, right? You should develop your magical ego. You should have a very strong sense of self. You should have a very, very strong sense of self. But you need to be able to negotiate that, right, at some level, or else it just becomes like a star that is collapsing on itself. So that's where it is in my magic, Tracy, is like celebrated and then challenged, and then celebrated and then challenged, and it's that dance that matters. So that's what it is for me.
Absolutely. Brian?
Well, we are taught that a witch should have the ego of a magician in moments, and the ego of a pious monk in other moments. So there are times when you have to have a very elevated ego, and then there are times when it doesn't serve you. So the main important thing is that in the work, the arts magical, in the great work, the path of initiation, ego is always involved. I think people always think of ego as a bad word, right? Because
Yes.
To quote Maxine, it is the bane of the craft, but I'd also say it's the bane of the occult and probably most religious experiences. But it's always involved. So there's healthy ego and there's toxic ego. And so a lot of occultists will talk about shattering the ego. I don't necessarily like that terminology necessarily. I know what they mean by it. But I think consciousness and awareness of the self and others, especially if you're teaching. If you're teaching, one of the tasks of that is to guide the egos of others in a healthy way, in a way that doesn't smack them down, but doesn't, make them go mad with it either. Let them climb up, they'll fall down. We know that, right? So it is what it is. But I think it's a huge aspect of the occult in general. A priest should be humble, but a witch sometimes has to be the most powerful person in the universe. So that's what I'm going to say about it.
Ellie?
I love that. When you were saying the question in traditional witchcraft, where do we place the ego, its importance? Or my first response when it came into my brain was thinking about when we are initiated and when we start coming into the space of the coven we're coming into, we're trained to be humble, quiet, observant, ask what we can do, serve. The ego really gets put right out the door right away, as far as I thought, and the training would start to develop you in that place of service, openness, and lack of ego. And kind of like Brian and Levi are saying, then there's periods of harder work and more development where you have to come in with some ego or else you're not going to get those things done, like work effectively in the circle. So I love the gentleness, though, of in the beginning, you have to put yourself in the hands of the priesthood, the high priesthood, and kind of give over your ego, I think, to get a really good start in Alexandrian and Gardnerian witchcraft. And that's how I think about it. That's how I thought about it right away when you asked it.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. Confidence is the key to, I think, a great practitioner, and also the key to witchcraft. But is having a strong ego the master key to a successful practice?
Who do you want to start with?
Levi?
Is having a healthy ego the key to a master practice? I guess if we're talking about it in terms of psychological health, then I think it's mandatory. Like, I think that if, the ego has went awry, into either, and it can go too low too. That's another thing, is like a self-loathing will destroy your magic as much as being an egomaniacal person. Mm-hmm. Like, if you're just some sort of pitiful self-loathing creature, then like you're not going to really function in, the circle. So yes, I do think it's important. I don't know if I would call it the key though. I think it's a part of something. I think that the more advanced you get, now here's what I'm stumbling over my words because I really want to be just like out there and say what I really think, but I got to be careful. I think that the whole point of what we do is the great work. I think when you lose track of that and you just focus on the self and thaumaturgy, that's how you end up with a crazed magician who just ends up dying in an opium den, right? I think it's just so detached from God. It's so detached from service. It's so detached from personal betterment. It's so detached from theurgy. That's just what you're going to end up with. And history is littered with examples. I mean, this is the Cagliostros of the world, the Crowleys, et cetera, et cetera. So what I call it the key, maybe in the beginning is what I'll say. In the beginning, yes. In the beginning, you need to think that circle is your circle. Those gods come because you are their priest or priestess. Like, you need that. Do I think in the end it's the key? No. I think the higher work comes at a time when the ego takes a step back.
Ellie?
I'm going to say straight up no. I think that you can develop a personality as a priest and be a very high-functioning witch and priest or priestess without having the proper or equilibrated development of the ego. And sometimes it could work out and sometimes not. But I think that's not the key. The master key is just the ego development. I think you can create a personality that does a great job with it. Like an actor. I know that's a weird answer. That's what I think.
Brian?
Will you rephrase the question to make sure I did not misunderstand?
Yes. Confidence is the key to witchcraft and a great practice. But is ego the master key?
Oh, I thought you said healthy ego, which was going to change my answer. Is ego the master key? I guess I'll go along with what I was thinking anyway. I think healthy ego is the master key. And I don't mean that in a self-help way. Your ego is how your consciousness navigates reality. and it can create delusions, it can create illusions, and also it can be completely aware. There's actually a scientific theory right now that consciousness exists throughout the entire universe. There's a whole idea about it in philosophy that's being reevaluated. I'm not going to try to get into that right now. But I think very much that self-awareness, when we go into witchcraft, if we were going to use the idea of Diana as being the first source of things, becoming self-aware of her ego, right, in the wandering throughout the universe. So your ego has to be healthy. And if it's healthy, in a sense, yes, it's the master key because it's consciousness, it's awareness. If you take you cannot take ego out of the human experience. It exists in positive or negative ways, And I think there are some traditions that always, when we mention ego, we're always saying it's bad. We're looking at it in that way. It can also be healthy and good. Like to what Levi was saying, somebody with a low self-esteem who is, feeling sorry for themselves or having a pity party all the time, they're going to curse themselves. We've all seen it when people generate this negative thing about themselves that then it starts manifesting. Likewise, we've seen people who think they're way grander than they really are. I think self-awareness is the key, and it is self-awareness of the ego. And without the sense of ego, you could not have a relationship with the divine. It's essential to who we are and how we interact with everything in reality. So that's how I'm going to answer it. Blessed be.
Blessed be. So I think you guys answered this, but so in what ways do you feel a strong ego is beneficial for a practitioner of traditional witchcraft, particularly in terms of personal power and mastery? Levi?
I think that it's very good in witchcraft when they come with a stronger sense of self, because they're hungrier and more vocal for the teachings. Nothing in witchcraft is given, it's asked for. Right, we really do value the concept of the seeker, right? The one who is on the journey. And there's so many sort of examples of this in the occult traditions. Whether it's the Fool's Journey, which is a somewhat modern kind of tarot take on it, whether it's the sort of Campbellian kind of concept of the hero of 1,000 faces. I have mixed feelings about Campbell, but it's just everywhere, and so I think that's where it can really shine for a student. I have a student in mind immediately when you ask this question, who is just someone who knows they are a priestess, just knows it. And it's become a part of this person's nature, entirely. And so they are much more open about asking me for things. They are ahead of students who, who don't ask as much, because they literally will call me, text me. They want to come over. They want to say, what can I do magically? What can I, what should I be reading? And that energy is rooted in a strong sense of self. And they feel, they believe, when we say to them, you're an initiate now, you're a priest, you're a priestess of the goddess, of witchcraft. I like it when a student believes you and says, okay, that's what I am now. And so I'm going to do that. And that is where I think a sense of self makes you an incredible student, because you really do just live it. You become it. It becomes, you believe the initiator and you live it. So in the beginning, I think it's great for students.
Brian?
Sorry, do the question again.
I think Brian went already. No.
In what way do you feel a strong ego could be beneficial for a practitioner of traditional witchcraft, particularly in the terms of personal power and mastery?
Well, I definitely think in magic, you do have to have a strong ego in moments, right? So I was taught that, for an example, when you cast a circle, you should feel like no one has ever cast a circle as great as the one that you're casting in that moment. That's the work of, in a sense, that's where we align with magicians, that they have this huge inflated thing. The difference between a magician and a witch, in my opinion, is that we're also priesthood, and so we can take that down, so you have to build it. But there are moments in magic when you have to be fully confident, just like there's moments in life when you have to be fully confident. And there's nothing toxic about that. It's people that fall into their own delusions and think everything they do is that grandiose. But you have to have that inner being in those moments, even if it's just for a moment of magic where you're one with the universe. And you can't do that if you don't have the confidence. That will hold you back. So you can't fake it either. You can't fake confidence, and so sometimes we have to develop, we have two kinds of students that could be problematic in the ego. Those who have inflated egos and think everything they've ever done, they walk into the circle thinking, I've been doing this for years, kind of a thing. And then you have the other ones that, occasionally the ones we try to avoid, who are weak, and witches don't really want weak initiates. So I don't think we encounter them very often. But those are the two extreme egos that you might have to deal with in the magical world. I see you, Ellie. But yeah, I can't think of anyone in our circles that I would say was weak.
No.
Usually. But it probably does happen, right? So
it happens.
What about you, Ellie?
It does happen. Ellie?
I love this. I think that, and it gives you a chance to think about it. For me, a really strong, balanced ego is more like an energy, a verb, and it's the comfort of the person in their skin. It's the command of themselves. They are self-seeking. They analyze themselves. They're curious. They want to learn. They're open-minded, but they're also confident in themselves. They know themselves. And when you bring that really to any occupation, including witchcraft or spiritual service or magic, I think you can recognize it. It's not weakness. It's general personal energy. Sometimes it ebbs and flows. We all have good and bad days with our ego, no doubt about it. And I know I certainly have made mistakes with my ego and recognize it and have learned from it. But you can't really stay on the negative side too long either. You have to control the energy and bring that brilliant, enlightenment seeking energy and enthusiasm ego to the work. That's what I like to see. And I do think it is something you can work on and grow, but something at a base level's got to be there, that spark, I think, magically, to really have a good ego and do magic, yeah.
I tell my students, if you're in a circle and you get around and at some point someone's in there and the energy just drops, that person is either feeling like self-depreciating, they don't feel they know enough, they're not asking enough questions, and the energy in that kind of situation just, it disrupts the whole circle. And I've had both those situations. I have a student now who's amazing and who I got as a recommendation from, of all places, Christian Day. And he's amazing, and he asks all the right question, and he's willing to learn. And I don't feel yes, I think he's got a strong sense of self, but he's not egotistical. He wants to learn. And I think that makes a great student. Next question. We all know there are people who spend more time worshiping at the altars of their egos than they do in service to the gods. Jack of all trades, master of none. What are some potentially negative consequences of an inflated ego within a coven or witchcraft community?
Ellie.
Go, girl.
We've mastered the Jedi mind trick.
Right. Well, just obviously one of the downsides of that is going to be it's going to be deranged really pretty quickly. With the maniacal and wanting to control everyone, then you begin to develop insecurities and everyone's spying on each other and following each other and checking on things. I think I've seen things go south really quickly because it kind of spreads out fast. When you've got that warped of a sense of importance but I agree with you too, the malnourished ego is another problem. The victim can take some group of people down negatively and downward spiral in the same way. It's too unbalanced too quickly. When you spend too much time worshiping yourself, I just, and if you're busy and you're active in service and you're teaching and you're doing all the associated productive work about being in a coven and doing coven witchcraft, we're not sitting on our hands. We're busy. We are working in our communities. I think that's just got to be true. When you don't see that for individual witches, especially in a coven, you need to ask what they're doing. I think it can get unbalanced really quickly. Okay, my answer. Ding, 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 ding.
Levi?
Whew, the dangers of it. You'll destroy yourself. I mean, I don't know how much simpler it can be. This is the destruction of most miserable people. Like when I think about most of the people who I've met who are truly miserable, not that we think are because they believe differently than we are, but like legitimately are self-imploding. It's almost always because they can't get out of their own head. And it can be negative or positive. Mm-hmm. There's a form of depression that is nothing more than twisted narcissism, right? Where it's like, the whole world revolves around you and it's just so terrible, versus the whole world revolves around you and it's so great. They're two sides of the same coin, which is you are the most important thing in the universe, which is a recipe for depression. It's a recipe to make sure that you will die alone with, a county health care, because there is nothing that will drive people away from you more. I mean, then if the only thing that matters in the universe is yourself, and you've never truly given yourself over to sacrifice, love, the other, whatever you need, community, like Ellie's talking about, the danger is just utter oblivion. I mean, that's the danger, Tracy, is just complete destruction. And in the occult and magical communities, that is pumped up to an 11 out of 10 in terms of setting yourself up for mental illness and delusion. Mm-hmm. Like, the amount of people in this community who just live in an absolute fantasy world 24/7, 365. Mm-hmm. And this is very common, I find, amongst people who label themselves as empaths and psychics at the same time, who say that they are gifted with this great curse of being a healer, and and they have a message for humanity. They're a star seed or whatever. That's ego. It's just ego.
Mm-hmm.
I want to add one.
Brian? Oh, go ahead.
I just want to add one sentence to Levi. The 12th house is the hidden house, and it does rule being institutionalized in mental hospitals. And I think it's really true about the extreme with the ego. And put it in the 12th house. Okay. Recipe.
I would love to say they just implode, but unfortunately they can go on for quite some time. I mean, Aleister Crowley is an example of this personality type. He probably always wasn't a bad egg, because obviously, whether you love or hate him, he probably, eventually devolved into the person that he became. But he had a constant following, probably because of the fame and because at one point in time he had money. If you really research him, though, he would sort of move on quite a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He didn't stay in the same group, really. He just went around to whoever was following him at the time. But eventually he did implode. Eventually he did. That's because they're following for their own BS. They're following for their own delusions. So, unfortunately, the dark side of the occult, the negative, or not the dark side of the occult, the dark side of the ego and the dark side of the occult, because I think the ego is the dark side of the occult. In the least, I think that's just, once again, consciousness, right? So, usually the people who are like that are also very vile. They really focus in on cursing. They focus in on destroying. They focus in on conflict. You won't meet them as healers usually, unless they're charging money for it. It's definitely a situation to where you can identify it. There's a difference between somebody who just knows they look really sexy in this vest to somebody who thinks that they are, the answer to your prayers. And I'd like to think that witchcraft, Gardnerian Alexandrian, witches of the book, which is what I prefer to say, I'd like to think the book is set up to where it really discourages this kind of behavior. It doesn't mean that it doesn't happen, but I find it's the witches who aren't following the book, the original Book of Shadows, that are privy to fall for these sort of delusions of, I'm the grand empress witch queen, or, whatever. I also think that people who are toxic like that usually don't make good teachers because they're not focused enough on other people.
Yeah.
Because a good teacher is going to focus on someone else's journey, and they think about that person's journey, and they think about how they could help. It's not so much thinking about like the errors as it is, what does this person need from me? And if you're a narcissist in that level, you're not going to be thinking about anyone but yourself. So you're not even going to be paying attention to your students. So I think you should know them by their fruit. But sometimes they do go on too long, right? So, and that's, Trump, right? So,
yeah.
Ego.
I actually have a lot of experience with those kind of teachers. I'm just saying. But you didn't hear that from me. Balancing personal goals with community harmony is challenging. But not everybody gives a rat's ass about community harmony. How can practitioners balance personal ambition with humility in their craft to ensure healthy and ethical practice? Levi?
I did a video about this recently. I think rooting yourself in a philosophy that avoids harm is a good idea. I think that the worst thing that has happened to the magical community as it's exploded into the popular discussion has been this very sort of ridiculous conversation around harm. That being pro-harm or whatever is a good thing if it's done in the name of X, Y, or Z or whatever. I believe that in the sense of fighting oppression. I believe that in the sense of fighting against that which is, harmful to the human race or whatever, or to a particular group that's being oppressed. Absolutely. Fight your battles. Mm-hmm. But I think if you don't have any vision for what this means larger than yourself, you're just going to be miserable. I don't know. It's like if it's just a bunch of curse slinging and sort of miserable, black magic and whatnot, and it's just tacky after a while. And the simple fact is, what Brian said really rings in my head right now, which is, judge the fruits. Kind of, the truth always plays out in the end. Are any of these people, and let's be real blunt and honest, that who are all about power, all about the self, are they anybody you want to be? Mm-mm. Are they? It's like these people that you idolize on the internet, that are, the biggest, gunslingers in town magically. I've met many of them. I know many of them. They're very vocal about their private lives. They're sort of people you wouldn't want to be. I wouldn't want to have been Crowley either. And, Craig said in the comments, by the way, thank you all for your comments. We're definitely going to...
Maybe young Crowley for like a week.
Crowley is not a genius to me. Craig said,
just to see what it's like.
Craig said Crowley's a genius. I disagree. I don't think there's anything in Crowley's writings that's not done better elsewhere, frankly. And I feel that way about a lot of the 20th century occult revival, but I don't blame them for it. Blavatsky and Crowley and everybody, they were working with what they had. They were bringing new concepts into the West. So I give them a lot of credit. But if you look at their concepts of God and goddess, or you look at their concepts that they pulled from Tantra, frankly, and from Tantric Buddhism, and then you go to the sources we have now, that we have all that stuff translated into English, like the philosophy of Abhinavagupta, the great Tantric philosopher of northern India, it pales in comparison. It's not even in the same ballpark. Crowley is a kindergartner to somebody like Abhinavagupta. And so I think that is where I get stuck sometimes, is the ego of these Western occultists, is the ego of being like, I have this special teaching that nobody knows, that they actually stole from a centuries-old tradition, right? So that's not genius to me. That's just, but I will say, I think he was a sort of artistic genius. I love his poetry. Yes. I love the liturgy. I love, artistic genius, sure. But like magical, philosophical genius, no, right? And I think that's, I know I took us on a rabbit hole with Crowley, but.
Ellie?
We're in a big rabbit hole right now. Okay, not even that, a field of rabbit holes. Okay, I'm going to go back to, I don't even know the question anymore, but I know my answer. Because I thought of it right away, and I thought, okay, and then Levi took us on a, a skiing trip. So, okay, here's my answer.
Apologize.
I think
I love you, Eli.
I do too. I love to listen to Levi. I think that it's a wonderful privilege and honor that human beings, as a being, get to work on themselves in the great work and try to perfect our nature, become authentic, develop our ego properly. But I just feel that we naturally, and probably the most percentage of us, want to be good. We do. We want to strive to be great people. And to me, that includes waking up every day saying, how can I be helpful? How can I have nice manners? How can I have etiquette? How can I always think, I want to be aware of everything and everyone around me all the time and observing. Am I helping the situation? Is it better and more peaceful? Am I contributing to that? Like, it's honorable for me to be a good person and work to do that as an example, and to not let ego and ego battles and all those kind of things that go on, especially more maybe in the witchcraft world, to not let that bring me down, nor allow me to behave in less sophisticated ways. I just don't want to do it. I want to keep being good. That's my answer, and I don't know the question. Blessed be. Blessed be.
Blessed be.
Blessed be.
What was the question?
Yeah, right. We don't know the question at all.
The question is, how can practitioners balance personal ambition with humility in their craft to ensure healthy and ethical practice?
See, my answer was good. I did know the question.
Good training.
Ooh, good answer, Brian.
Good teacher and get good training. And know what you're getting yourself into. Understand what the belief system is. And if you align with it, fully embrace it. Because witchcraft doesn't need our help to be ethical. It came with the training. It came with the book. It tells us. It gives us the wisdom of our ancestors. It gives us the wisdom of our elders. Tried and true method that still works today. I think that the Book of Shadows is my beacon. Do I need it to be ethical? No, because quite frankly, I think it's built into our souls, if you're in touch with yourself. But it is a good guideline, and it certainly tells witches how to behave, and we're not that great at doing that, are we? So it gives us wisdom on how we interact with each other, first and foremost by telling us not to. So I think social media is probably the biggest problem we have now. Not things like this.
Absolutely.
Somebody can watch. This is educational. It's not an opportunity for people to fight. I think some of these Facebook groups, and I run one loosely, but I think some of them are very toxic and cause a lot of problems, because if you're not in a coven with somebody, then you don't really have it's wonderful. Like, we're going to have the Grand Sabbath coming up next year for the Alexandrians to go to Cornwall, 60 of us anyway. And, those are wonderful times to get together and plug in to the roots, because sometimes people do have something your elders missed, or so on and so forth. And it's time for us to, we've all kind of heard the stories of the witches shared their spells at the Sabbath, sort of shared their magic. So it's a great time to exchange information and to learn from the broader tradition and to plug into the broader tradition. Then we're all supposed to go home and mind our own business. Witchcraft is a secret society. So it's supposed to be that way. Period. The end, as an old friend used to say. And I think when it's not, I think that's when we get the problems. People want it to be like it's the Catholic Church. They want there to be a pope. They want someone to be able to tell them what to do. It's not the way of the witch. We are supposed to be in small groups. Yes, we have a tradition, and Levi and I think Levi's the one who started it, but we came up with kind of a correlation. The early Christian church, before it was what it is now, really was run by just different bishops, very much like coven leaders. Different bishops, and they communicated, they had councils, they tried to work things out, but there wasn't a pope, in the early days. There were just groups of people who had their representative speaking for them to sort of gain knowledge and to philosophize about what's going on. And I think that's important as a tradition. Gardnerians and Alexandrians, separately or even together, should be able to, through their leadership, have a connection. But it should just be through the leadership. It should not be through the covens. You don't need to be mingling with other coven members from somebody else's coven. That's toxic. It's against the Book of Shadows, and it creates negative consequences. Mm-hmm. And I think this is true of religion in general. I think even if you're a Christian, you're better off worshiping with 15 people than 50. You just are. You're gonna have a better chance of the Holy Spirit showing up, if you all know what I mean. Because there's an intimacy to it. There's an intimacy to it. I don't know if I really answered the question. Blessed be.
You did.
Can I add one quick thing? I love what you just said, Brian, a lot, because that's always been true. Like, if you look at the history of mysticism, it didn't happen at big, huge cathedrals. It happened in nunneries, right? Or like the mystics of Islam were Sufis that gathered in small groups, right, to do their practices outside of the larger. So yeah, I've never thought of that, but that's kind of true of mysticism in general. There's always this drawing in towards intimacy and away from the grand. And the more they go to the grand, the less in touch with God they get, right? So that's a good point. It's really hard
to be grand, 3 to 13 people, butt-ass naked.
But I like that.
Unless you look like me, of course.
I mean, yes, we're part of a tradition, but as far as I'm concerned, there is no Grand Witches' Council. No one has authority over our personal sovereignty. No. A lot of people don't like the fact that, they don't. But, that's the way it is. If you look at the book, there is no, you are beholding to, your high priestess after you high wolf. No, no. That's what autonomy is. So, yes, thank you for your answers. Next question. Personal power in witchcraft. Is it legit, or is it just an ego trip with fancy spells?
I think it's my turn to go first.
Go, take it.
Go. I'm excited.
I think personal power does matter, in a certain way. And I'd love to be able to explain this just to the four of you right now why I think this. But I think personal power does matter, but alone it is not witchcraft. Alone it is not witchcraft. We work in these bodies, and it is through these bodies that we work the arts magical. It's through these bodies that we initiate each other. It's through these bodies that we're functioning magically, and each body is personal. So I do think personal power does have a role to play, but as we've sort of evolved the term through this show, I think we did do this, Levi. I think we did. Other also matters, and in witchcraft it's said you may not be a witch alone, because in witchcraft, personal power isn't witchcraft, right? But it certainly comes into the equation. Hopefully that answers the question. That's all I have to say.
It does.
Yes.
Levi?
Personal power. I think I would just need a definition of that. I think everybody's going to have a different definition of it. And to me, I have met quite a lot of people who have an enormous amount of power in terms of they're very wealthy. They can command a room. They have made their mark on the world. And they're kind of the most miserable people I know. They're often people who are sort of slaves to their job. They're people who are slaves to public opinion. They are, absolutely entrenched in some.
Somehow, Levi, I managed to live in the middle of everything you just said.
But you're a witch. It's different, right? Like, you're in a spiritual climate. I
am all the first things you said, but I'm none of the other things you said.
It's like, that's different. It's a spiritual thing. But like, I've met so many people who have an enormous amount of power in the world and are the weakest people I know, because they just cannot be happy. They cannot enjoy anything. There's a famous speech by David Foster Wallace. He gave a commencement speech at Kenyon College. The speech is called, I mention it all the time to people, but it's called This Is Water. You can find it on YouTube. But there's a point where he says, worship something. He's like, pick the Wiccan mother goddess, or he actually says that, or Jesus, or the Four Noble Truths, or an inviolable set of principles, or whatever. Because if you worship power, you will always feel weak. If you worship beauty, you will feel hideous. If you worship youth, you'll be terrified of aging. Like, you have to be so secure in yourself and your ego that you are not a slave to false idols, right? It's
I think I worship youth.
Well, good luck. But I think that's absolutely something that I notice. Personal power is great, but if it's not trained, if there's no discipline to it, I usually just find people who all that power, they mold that power into chains, and then it's just a gilded cage.
Ellie?
I took this question differently. I heard it as, is power gained in witchcraft real power or illusory because of our inflated egos? So my instinctive answer was, hell yeah, it's real. I think we actually have real power that we develop. We come probably with some natural level, not just charisma, not just an interesting personality, but achievement magically. I mean, you can look around and see who's achieving some things and who isn't, just in your health and your security and good relationships and a career you like and a stable home. I mean, that's the classic basics. So I think that power is real. I think we're creating strong will, a healthy ego, hopefully a healthy, strong, balanced body, and then high functioning in your chosen worlds with your people, your activities. I think the power is real. It can be there, and then it can be inflated by the ego personality problems. And then you start to see the cracks, like Brian and Levi are saying, and then you start to see, the first thing I always notice is the excuses about why the car broke down, or they don't have it anymore, or, oh, that's me, I forgot, that's one of my excuses, I don't have a car anymore. It's true, actually, I do have one now, but I didn't for a few months, and I had to say, oh my God, I don't have a car. Just all of it. Oh, I had to move. My landlord turned out to be a real horrible person. I had to move in the night. You're like, oh, really? So those things start happening, right? The small failures, and then the excuse making. And I always see that as the beginning of the downfall with the ego and power, real ability. But I think, yes, we have real power in the real world physically, and on top of that, maybe some ego issues. Ding, ding, ding.
Brian, did you answer, or did I? I mean, I'm.
He went first.
That question?
I think it's Levi's turn. Or did we all do it?
You went first, didn't you, Brian?
I think so.
Yes,
yeah.
Brian went first. He wanted to go first.
Why can't we not keep track of the questions?
I know. We're very the energy.
I don't know.
I think
me.
No, I went last. You answered too, because I had that different answer that I heard a different question about it.
I think we're ready for the new question if we haven't gone through all of them.
Yeah.
So, in working with deity and spiritual entities, do you ever wonder if they're rolling their eyes at inflated egos of some of the practitioners? Ellie's going.
I hear it all day long. The gods, yes, rolling their eyes are perpetually stuck in the back of their heads. It can't be easy. I tell them all the time, I'm like, I'm sorry I'll panned out to be the gods, because it's got to be a pain in the ass by now dealing with humans. But yes, and I think our spirit guides, like I hear them, and I hear my client spirit guides, and they're just cracking on us all the time, like, yeah, that's what he said. He's going to get a new truck, right? Yeah. Tell her no, he's not going to call her. She's a dingbat. He's not calling her. I mean, I hear this overlay constantly. So the gods, yes. Ego, it's different than that, though. They look at it, the whole spectrum of human malfeasance and poor behavior, to them is all one ball of wax, and they just think it's funny, and they're joking on us. We're on a big Saturday Night Live stage, and we don't even know it. But yeah, that's what's going on.
Levi?
Well, I don't think I don't believe in the gods that in that sort of fashion where I think they're individual beings somewhere in the universe that think things necessarily. I think that they are manifestations of consciousness, of a supreme consciousness, what is called Brahman in Hinduism, what we have our own name for in craft that all of us know on this call. It's like, I think all gods are manifestations of that, even the god and the goddess of craft. But I actually think if you look at a lot of developed theologies, there is a long history of what you're talking about. In Greek In Greek philosophy, you have this idea of the gods being, very, they think things are funny, right? In the mythology. And then in a lot of dharmic traditions in India, there's this idea of the gods as engaging in what's called lila, which is play, right? That everything to the divine consciousness is play, because they don't understand individual consciousness. They do, but they're so far above it, or above is not even the right word. There's such a larger exposition of it that our petty concerns wouldn't matter at that level. I mean, what do you care about somebody suffering when you're at the level that time is irrelevant? It's like when, the goddess is eternal in craft. So what does time mean to her? Nothing, right? It's like she only understands it through the god. So like, I think that is a powerful theology that has found its way into a lot of histories of the gods enjoying things for play. And so I do think sometimes it's a great tool against bad ego. One of the best tools against having a toxic ego is humor. Anybody who has a bad ego cannot laugh at themselves, ever. Trump is a perfect example of this, right?
Absolutely.
People who cannot take a joke about themselves ever are people who have toxic egos. And so on that, I agree with you. I would say metaphorically, I think the gods roll their eyes or whatever. And I don't really believe that literally, but I like the idea of it philosophically and as a teaching tool. Like to get yourself out of your own head and look at it from the divine perspective and be like, oh, this is ridiculous. Like I'm being so silly right now. Like this means nothing in the grand scheme, right? And so, yes, I think it's a great teaching tool to, the idea of, we make our plans and the gods laugh. Like, I think that's a teaching tool to keep you sane.
Brian?
What is that ABBA song? The gods have fun with dice. Their minds as cold as ice. I'm going to skip the philosophy because Levi did a good job on that. And say a weird idea that I have about this. So I believe that the goddess, consciousness of the goddess, because like Levi, I believe that they're not action figures in the sky, but consciousness is an awareness. And our relationship with that consciousness is, that's a whole ball of wax I'm not going to get into. But I think of the witchcraft god and goddess as, in a way, very specific. Right? Like, I believe in all gods are one god and all goddesses are one goddess, but I think there's a specific power behind our gods that we're channeling, that we're bringing into the world. And I think that for normal people, the goddess loves everyone. I think she loves all humans, all animals, all of nature, that she's just pure love. She's Kuan Yin. She's pure love, right? For normal. I think that our God is uninterested in normal people. I think he's interested in the animals. I think he's interested in nature, but I don't think he's very interested in normal people. Now, for initiates, I think that the goddess is a taskmaster. I think she presides over initiation, and for initiates, she shows tough love because she's there to teach you. You've asked for something. She's going to be a hard mistress for you because you've asked for change. Daddy, on the other hand, he does us all kinds of favors and gives us cookies. He loves us. So I think that's the way I think of this, and that's going to be my fun answer. So I think it just depends on how you have a relationship with with the gods. But I don't think of the gods as being a pantheon. I very specifically think of the gods as being the moon goddess of witchcraft and the horned god of death and resurrection.
I can't tell you how many times I've been in circle that I'm like, this is ridiculous. What the heck are we doing? And then it ends up being the most spectacular circle we've ever had. And it was most powerful. But at the beginning of it, we're like, this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. And I think that's a lesson in keeping your ego in check. When you feel like what you're doing is ridiculous, but it ends up turning out so beautiful in the end. Let's see.
Yes. I do not think this is oath-breaking to say that the word mirth is literally mentioned in our liturgy. Like,
Yes,
it's like mirth is a
absolutely.
part of this religion. Like, you are supposed to be happy and laugh sometimes with your gods. You know, it's like we are
Yes.
supposed to laugh with the gods. Like, let us dance and feast until the last of our oppressors are dead. I can quote that one because it's not the
Yes.
real one, but like, you know, it's the one from Leland. But like, yes, I agree with that so much. Humor is absolutely a part. A teacher with no humor is a terrible teacher.
Right. And our students, the first thing I tell them when they're first coming into like our teaching circle is they have this look on their face of like terror. And I'm like, it's not like that. Relax. This is supposed to be fun. You know, yes, there's reverence, but it's not supposed to be terrifying. Relax, enjoy the experience. And eventually they do, but not right out of the gate. My
Christian
next question
says in the
is,
comments that he thinks too many got that confused with girth.
No, I didn't see his comment.
okay, I'm not even going there. I could, but I'm not going to. I believe a balanced ego is crucial to spiritual growth. I've told my students, leave your ego outside the circle, but as a high priestess, that's not always possible. Can you share some of your practices, of course, not oath-bound, in traditional witchcraft, that are designed to manage or mitigate an overinflated ego, either in yourselves or your students?
Me first.
Go, Brian.
First of all, I've got to tell you, I love the fact that you're calling it traditional witchcraft. See what you're doing
Yes.
there. Because it is. Alexandrian Gardnerian craft is witchcraft. In craft, in the occult, when we're saying ego, we're talking about the mundane ego, right? That's what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So, as I was taught, or others have been taught, there's a difference between the mundane ego and the magical ego. So I want you to have a very healthy magical ego. Not like overinflated to where you're like, you know, a problematic ego. But your mundane ego is the one that you usually have to put it in check because you're coming into the temple, you know. As you're saying, high priesthood has to be in charge. So they can't really... they can't really demonstrate all the time humility. But we like to hope by then they've been trained and gone through that themselves. So what was the question again? I can't remember the questions tonight. I cannot remember.
The question is, as a high priest, in my case, high priestess, but as a high priest, it's not always possible to put your ego aside.
All right, gotcha. Yeah, I was on the right track, and then I just make sure I didn't like go off into a tangent.
I like tangents.
You just can't always act like it, right? You've got a job to do. So I was just talking to the coven here in Salem about, you know, there might be times when I look at the group and I say, silence! You know, for some people are used to it and they're like, haha, there's no anger in it. There's no malice in it. It's a part of training. People weren't focusing enough. I had something important to say. I needed to shut down all this, but I'm not actually mad. It's a bit of fun, really, honestly. And they're usually aware of that, not in the beginning, but they become aware of it. That being attacked by Brian Kane is really like being attacked by a fur coat, really. So once you're on the inside, but I do have the ability to be able to shift, and act the part when necessary. So I think a good, legitimate high priest or high priestess, they're doing their job. I love that scene from The Devil Wears Prada. I don't know why I can constantly turn that movie into a witchcraft metaphor. But
I do too.
She's complaining to that one guy about how mean what's her name is to her, and she said, he said, you're really not trying. Wake up. She's just doing her job. So I think sometimes people think we're being stern. It's that we're actually just doing our job. One that you've asked us to do. Like, you came to us, you asked us for initiation, you asked us to train, and our goal is to develop you, and we usually get nothing out of it. So, I mean, I guess some people have the goals of having a huge downline, but there's no guarantee in that, that those people are going to turn out, to remain loyal or to remain kind, because they can just run with it, I'll give Levi the kudos here. He's always treated Mama right, both all the mamas. But he's doing his own thing. I'm not lording over him. I mind my own business. You could ask him 9 times out of 10 if we talk about his covenants, because he's brought it up, not me.
Yep.
And I'm willing to be an advisor for him, based on my experience. Does he always take it? Probably not. Probably wise sometimes not to. But it is what it is. So that's the answer to the question.
Blessed be.
Levi? Blessed be.
You mentioned practices, like what practices can you do? Serve your coven. Like, show up, bring your offerings, listen to the teacher. If you're the teacher, plan your lessons, like have interesting things, listen to your students, like serve the coven. One of the things that has destroyed a lot of craft is this idea of, and it's a very neo-pagan idea that came from contemporary paganism that we allowed to leak into our tradition, which is like, this is really all just sort of a coffee clutch where we get together and we discuss what we're doing. No. This is a tradition. It has a liturgy. It has, 8 Sabbaths. It has a set way of working, not because we think it's some sort of divine handed down, commandment from the gods. It's not. It's, very, very eclectic in where it comes from, but it functions, and that's why we do it. And so the best way to get out of your own ego and the best practice, like something more practical, Tracy, is absolutely do the work. Just like one of the things that drives me insane, and I'm not picking on anybody, I promise, not anybody in my coven or any other coven, but I get really irritated when people are like, well, I couldn't memorize it. And it's 5 lines. 5 lines. Like, do you know how many, like in Tantra, how many syllables are in the mantras you have to have memorized before you get to be moved on? I mean, it's like pages and pages of Sanskrit. So like, it's just very annoying to me when that to me is like the recipe for a bad ego. It's like, if you show up and you don't do the work, serve your coven. That is how you get rid of the ego.
Absolutely.
Great idea. I'll move on from that. I'm thinking about methods as a high priesthood, because you're right, there's a balance. You have to have the strength to be in command. I have learned a lot from Brian about bucking up and being in charge and telling people what's going on, being the leader. I've had to learn some stricter things there, but in managing for yourself so that your own ego stays balanced. I love Levi's answer. Get to work, get busy, start serving. Read things, memorize things, plan lessons, organize activities for your group, clean extra. There's plenty to be done that I think is really balancing. And if your coven see you working and being fully engaged and thinking ahead and participating, they're going to respect you when you have to give them a quick silence, stop talking, or I'm teaching, not you. And my thing is I go, or, like I'm talking to my dog, get away from the refrigerator. So I think it's a balance. You have to have the strength to control and manage the coven as a high priesthood, but you've also got to show that you have worked hard to manage your own ego, right? That's what you're kind of saying to it.
You have to
do the work.
Like, one of the things is like, I struggle, like if I tell somebody, why haven't you memorized that? I should have it memorized, right? Like if I'm barking at you because you didn't do it, I should be able to stand up and do it without looking, without doing, like that is how you serve as high priesthood. Is like they trust it because you prove you've done the work. It should roll off your tongue like butter if you're complaining about somebody else not doing it.
Absolutely.
Same with like you did pentagrams. Like if you become mad about somebody because of pentagrams, you should get up and do a perfect one. Right? Like that's the you have to be solid in your foundations.
Ellie, I have to tell you that when you were talking about pentagrams, that was awesome, because that was the next thing I was going to bring to my own group about how perfectly they should be done. And to Levi's point, that was my biggest lesson was learning how to be the leader, because believe it or not, I'm a little shy and I'm more soft-spoken and quiet than you might think. So learning to say, you need to be quiet. This is what we're doing. We're having sex. We're, drawing down or whatever we're doing. That was difficult for me at first, but now, like a million years later, if I tell my student to read a book and I read it like 100 years ago, I'm going to read it again. I'm going to listen to it on audio. So I know that the next time I meet with them, I'm going to be able to discuss exactly what they're reading. So I'm just not pulling it out of the air something that I read so long ago, I can't even remember the details. I never went into this with the idea, I'm going to be a high priestess, I'm going to form my own coven. No, I was going to serve the gods. That was it. But then I realized that in order to serve the gods, I have to preserve the craft. So that's why I started teaching and having my own students and having an outer court and forming my own coven. That wasn't my initial thing.
But you got to.
Blessed be.
And I think
Blessed be.
Blessed be. And I think that's all the questions I have.
Wonderful. So if you
It's time for the call-ins.
Yes.
309 blonde bomb. Oh wait, I'm not blonde.
That's right.
Yeah.
309
Brunette.
gothic. Well, 309 goddess. We never get calls because people don't call in. So if you don't call, then we're going to turn the phones off and you'll never be able to call. We'd rather hear your voice. But if you can't call in because you're cowardly or whatever, Levi will take your questions in the chat.
Yes, we've actually had a ton of comments, so thank you all. You've been so wonderful, engaging, talking to each other, even about certain things that have been brought up by Tracy's questions. I love that. I'm going to go through, and some things that really jumped out at me. Sometimes if you ask a question, I'll definitely bring it to the group, and Tracy will join us to answer. But also there's some comments in here I thought I wanted to turn into questions. Like Craig has one I really liked early on that I want to turn into a question. His comment is, sometimes people seem to have a weak ego because they actually have a strong ego which they've weaponized against themselves. And have you ever seen have you seen that in the magical space where somebody just turns all their... So like, for example, they become self-destructive, like through their negative self-talk, kind of like how you were talking, Brian, about they almost curse themselves.
Yeah, but I don't think that's a strong ego. I think that's a weak ego.
You don't think it could be turned outward though if you taught them and it could be helped that way?
Well, because you're talking about two different things as far as like I'm hearing it. Sorry, I'm taking over here, but if you have an ego that's attacking yourself,
yeah,
you need therapy, not witchcraft.
You know what? That's not a bad answer, Brian.
With that, so no, I don't think there's any. If someone's like that, I don't think witchcraft can help them. Maybe if they're a little bit like that, working around strong people, I would avoid a student like that at all costs. Gotcha. But if one slipped in or something, I try to help them. I try to lift them up, because then you're stuck with them. You've got to try to make it better. You're only as good as the weakest link, right? So in that case, I don't know. I think I'd give them to Ellie, because I'd find it terribly irritating.
Tracy,
help this person.
I would help them.
I don't think that a strong ego would... Well, a strong ego you can turn on yourself.
Yeah, strong doesn't mean disciplined.
No.
You mean an overinflated ego?
That they've and it's collapsed on itself. They've become self-destructive.
Strong, it's.
Well, that I could see. An overinflated ego
consciousness
collapsed on themselves. I can see that. Absolutely. I've seen that happen.
Yeah, that's delusion. You're suffering from delusion. That's what that is.
I've, seen people, have this whole projection of where they're going to be 5 years from now, and they're going to be running a coven, and they're going to be doing a million other things and writing books, and they're doing nothing because their ego was telling them, this is all the things you're going to be doing, but they never follow through with any of it. Is that the weakness in their ego? I don't know. I mean, I would think that's the kind of situation that they're talking about. You know, I think that some people just have an overinflated ego. They plan too much in their heads. They're going to do all this stuff, but they don't follow through. And that's where their ego collapses on itself.
Yeah. Ellie, would you add anything to that about like ego turning on itself?
No, but I had another thought, but I can't remember it now.
We can come back to it.
Oh, I want to say one thing from just a few minutes.
Because we're all very like scattered about everything. Like we're having a great conversation, but it's sort of like one of the things I loved about this, Tracy, is it's almost like I get the topic, but it's been very fluid, that it's the same conversation with different angles, you know, and I think that's what I didn't quite understand what you were saying, Levi, when you asked the question, and so maybe this will help Ellie come up with an idea. It's delusion that they're talking about. So when you say strong, because I believe an ego can be healthy and strong, I didn't quite know what you meant, but they're suffering from delusion. Their overinflated ego is so powerful, so strong, that they have succumbed to this delusion. And it's what Tracy's saying. They've got all these ideas, they're going to do all these grand things, but it's not based in reality. It's all self-delusion. And that's the most destructive part of the ego, is that right there.
I do want to add this idea, and it's not really my other thing that I can't remember. I went back to that comment I brought up about how I thought people could have a created personality or persona, that they could actually effectively be a high priest and run a coven, or high priestess, but that internally maybe their ego and their personality wasn't really that developed, but they could make a personality that could do it effectively. And I think that goes back to Craig's idea about turning in on yourself. You have so much maybe fake power, but real insecurity on the inside, and then you turn that fake power on yourself, and then I think we see the evidence of the crumbling. I think also we spot that evidence of big words and no action. You know, they're going to become famous. They are famous. They're doing great things, but every day they're not really doing anything. But I think it could be narcissism and sociopathy at work, honestly. I really thought those things real specifically just now about that kind of personality type. And they do exist in witchcraft and covens, and sometimes it takes a little bit of time to spot them, and then you start really recognizing the signs. And I think that's ego problem and things that are turned in on themselves and projected outward. You think, Levi? Narcissism, sociopathy?
Maybe. I think it depends on the person.
Okay.
I mean, it's going to manifest differently.
As an occurrence.
Down to, you know them by their fruits, right?
Yeah.
So you can't run a coven. Like if someone's running a good coven, it's because they've got the qualities to do it. You can't fake that.
Right.
People have, but they're not good covens.
Right.
You can't
That's right.
being a good teacher. You can't fake being a good teacher. You can't fake having talent. You know, those are things you can't fake. Can you fake? The only thing you can really fake is how much you care about it. You know, but that will out. That will always out. You know, for those of us, as my first teacher said, if a mask is held up, it will fall away quicker in the presence of a steady gaze. Blessed be.
We have a caller.
Blessed be. Oh, goody.
Is it Christian?
No. Hi, is this Kelly?
Yes.
Hi, Kelly. What's your question?
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
One, I am not a practitioner of the craft. I've been following you guys for a couple of years, and I've been interested. So I don't quite understand. You talk a lot about ego, be it weak or strong, but as priests and priestesses, isn't that a large responsibility that you have? Because you're going to see which way that person is, that initiate is going before they will. And you have that opportunity to help them balance that, I guess. And maybe I have it wrong and I don't have a full understanding, but don't you all have a large responsibility in catching it as soon as you see it and then help course correct that individual?
I love that question. Tracy, do you want to start with you? I'm going to mute you, Kelly, just while we answer so there's not feedback, but I will unmute you to check in with you. So I'm just letting you know, okay?
Yes, I absolutely think that you can guide them if you see that their ego is unbalanced. You have to do it really in a sensitive way that you're not, I'm trying to think of the words. That you're not like making them feel that they're actually doing something wrong. You're just trying to guide them so that they realize that their ego is really what's guiding them, and that it needs to take a step back so that the learning can take place. Because if you think you know everything already, okay, it's going to be hard for you to learn anything else. It's like when someone comes from a different tradition or they've been in like an eclectic coven, it's really hard for them to learn something new. Well, that's not the way we did that before. They have to step back, put their ego aside and say, no, I don't know everything that I thought I did. And now I have to learn something new. They really need to put that part of themselves aside so that they can grow. That's where I would think.
Okay, Brian.
We're responsible for guiding their ego.
So I sort of stated this earlier. It's on the personal level the entire job. So as a teacher of a priesthood, you've got two jobs, right? To maintain the integrity of the priesthood. So you obviously need to make sure that you attempt, because we do fail sometimes, to put people in place that are going to serve that priesthood well, right? But on a personal level, every charge that is under you, you have a responsibility for their well-being and the well-being of the group. And ego is at play in both of those dynamics constantly. And that's one of the conversations I keep trying to have, because I think it's very common in the occult and witchcraft. We only mention ego when we're talking about negative qualities of the ego. The positive qualities of the ego are important as well. Ego is always at play. So people have come to us who we've chosen to accept to guide them on the path of initiation, which is a path asking for divine transformation. Most people don't know what they're asking for. That's why we tell them, no, you don't want to be initiated. You don't want this thing. You'd have to be mad to want this thing because it comes with challenges. You've asked the gods to change you. And if you make it difficult, it's going to be difficult, and it'll play out in your life. It's not going to play out in the magical circle. It'll play out in your love life. It'll play out in your professional life. It'll play out in your social life. It'll play out in your family. Whatever you need, it's going to manifest there to get you to have the transformation that you asked for. As your teachers, we are simply there to try to help guide you through that based on our experiences, and to use the trainings and techniques of the magical circle to help you do it to the best of your ability. Does require one to listen.
So I'll give you the last word, Ellie, because I can answer. I think my answer is going to be a little weird, Kelly. Yes, I have a responsibility to my students, and I should notice something going wonky and help course correct, absolutely. However, we're not Christians. And if you are going to choose to self-destruct, in some instances, I'm going to let you. Right, because when you got initiated, you were initiated as a priest or a priestess of the gods, as somebody whose will shall be worked into the world through magic, as somebody who seeks, power in connection to the gods and many other things. So, yes, I'm going to help you. I'm going to give you advice, but I'm not going to jerk your hand away from the fire. If you're fighting me on this and you're going to do it anyway, I'm going to let you. I won't let you destroy the group, but I am going to let you destroy yourself if that's your goal. Because I can't force you to stop, right? I can't step in and do something that dramatic, because there's a thing in Alcoholics Anonymous where they say you cannot force anyone to be sober and you cannot force anyone to drink, right? And that's a very hard pill to swallow when you're watching somebody suffer from something, that at the end of the day, their will must be involved too. So I can't course correct somebody who has ripped the wheel off of the ship, right? I just can't do that. And to try to do so would be destructive to myself.
There's no wheel. They ripped it off.
Yeah.
Well, this is going to go back to the beginning when Kelly was kind of expressing your observations about witchcraft, high priesthood, and what we have to do with our ego if we take on the challenge of becoming a high priest or high priestess running a coven. I learned this from Brian. It's a profession of service. You want to do it. You spend your life on it. It's your main focus spiritually, and it certainly is for all three of us. I spend most of my spiritually working time on Alexandrian witchcraft and the coven that I'm in, and I do have to have a great desire to do that, a strong ego to believe in myself, to keep doing it, to think that I'm on the right path in choosing this, that I'm properly being a good high priestess, and I'm serving my community and my coven, and I'm sincerely doing a good job working hard at it. So I have to have the strong ego for that. But to correct other people and take charge of other people's development is very challenging and nerve-wracking. And we're right. Mm-hmm. We have to do it in two ways. We have to correct and nudge when we recognize ego problems in students, but again, be able to do it from a place where we've been through it ourselves and people recognize we've worked on things and have improved, and now we're able to correct someone else. It's a real dance for me. It's a balance, but it's in constant observation. I think we'd see it in even Hermetics discussion nights instead of ritual nights. We see it in action, observation, correction, and all of us keeping our egos in check together every single time we're together. I think that's true. Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Kelly, for that fantastic question.
Mm-hmm. It was great.
No, thank you guys. And the responses made sense. And it was really more of, yes, I understand you're going to have those that come and they have some experience and maybe they picked up bad habits and maybe they're set in their ways and are doing things one way. But if you have someone brand new and maybe they are the runt of the litter as they're trying to find their way of the group until they get more of a foundation and grow a little bit more, or maybe they come in and excel and think they're Billy Badass, and I would think that you guys would see that before I would see that as someone new to the craft.
Yeah.
It would take me a little bit longer to see myself. And if you saw it first, then you could jump right in and say, hey, Kelly, hold on a minute, and then get me back on track. But yes, thank you guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I like that.
Kelly, we always attempt to do so.
Yes. I want to spring off of what she said at the end there. And give something, and maybe you all can relate to it, or maybe I'm just in left field here. I don't know about you, but one of the signs that a new student might have some issues with ego is when you give them something to do, and instead of giving themselves over to that process and like learning it or doing it, they start telling you how they feel about it. Right, like before anything has happened, right? like they're just like, well, you know what I think when I think about that? I don't care what you think. It's like that's so common as a teacher, where they'll be like, you know, when I think, like let's say I'm teaching them, like I give them, this is not something we do in craft. I've got to think of an example that's not oathbound. I give you some special ritual or prayer to Diana or whatever, and they're like, you know what Diana means to me, and I'm like, that's not the point of this, like.
I love that. Unverified personal gnosis.
Like, that's not the point of why we're doing this. I need you to have an experience here and show me you can do something. I don't need to know about your feelings about something.
I love that. Can I interrupt one really quickly? What I say to people is don't talk back. Be quiet. Like in readings, I tell them some profound incorrect information, and they're like, but I think that I said, no, you're not paying yourself for this. You're paying me. Be quiet. Don't talk back. And then I tell them the stuff again, and I go, Right?
That's what people, it's just you need it, though. Every now and then, it's like you have to learn the process before you put your ego in it.
Right.
Like, you have to have the experience before you start telling people what you think about it. It's just such a weird thing everybody does.
It'd be interesting. This is one of the things about teachers being able to talk to each other is you wonder, like, you two have experienced me on the other end. I haven't experienced me on the other end.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it is curious, isn't it? Because I do know Ellie, because Ellie and me are working partners, but we don't handle that sort of thing the same way. They're both effective, because when Ellie says no back talking, well, no one says anything, so it works. Back talking.
Back talking.
Well,
this is why we get paid the big bucks.
Oh yeah, right. Forbidden from doing so, actually. This is something I kind of want to ask because, like, Craig was debating, a little bit. He was, disagrees with me about Crowley, and I respect that. Like, everybody can have their own opinions about somebody, but
there's more than one Crowley. That's the thing that people
he went through so many faces.
There's more than one Brian Kane, because we have lived and we've grown and we've changed. So you have to sort of like look at time periods. I learned this actually from Maxine at one point in time, and I learned it for myself. Being, having a record, like you could go back, you could go watch all the Covendom episodes, and me and Levi would probably both disagree with ourselves at one point or another.
Oh yeah.
Now, or explain it better, whatever it is, because we're changing and we're growing.
I have a great idea.
Yes.
Can we please hire a video editor to make the best of Covendom? And we'll all have wine and we'll host it, but it'll be clips and little flashes through the years, the hair colors, the clothes.
A really fun thing for a grand finale.
Wouldn't it be funny? Yeah. I mean, can you see
That's
it?
what I would have do that.
Like it would be like one of the segments would be, about wine or port, and
Ooh, but I remember what I was going to ask.
I love that idea.
Everyone about Crowley was my exemplar for this, but like, sometimes someone's is a toxic person. They just have a crazy ego, but they did something incredible that the world needed or whatever. Like you kind of have.
There wasn't any competition.
But like I'm saying, like for example, we could argue that like Alex's ego got in his way, but I believe he was doing something for the goddess. Or Crowley's ego got in his way, but I think he
had to have an ego to do that work.
Exactly. So do you think sometimes that some people are kind of sacrificial lambs to the ego because they have a work to do for the world?
Or when is the ego? So obviously, I didn't know Alexander's personally, nor did anyone here. We're all going on. I mean, we the three of us have had personal interactions with the woman who was married to him, so we have a bit of insight. Some of that ego, from what I understand, it was there, but a lot of it was about the work. Like he fell into that public work and he did it well. And to get the spotlight of the cameras and take it away from the Gardnerians, king of the witches, it worked. And for a while he became he was one of the best spokesmen the craft ever had in that sense. But was it contrived or was it full on ego? That's the question. With Crowley, I think it was full on ego. It is at certain points of his life. But was that true when he was younger? When he was younger, he might have been more sincere. And in his later days, he was just trying to sing for his supper and get opium. So from what we hear, once again, we weren't there, right? So I think that's a terrible mistake for any of us to assume we actually know everything about any of these people, because we weren't there. We're going off speculation. I don't know. Maxine says Alex had a bit of an ego, but I still think some of the work was...
So yeah, that's a good answer to the question. But like Tracy, do you think that there are some times where somebody needs an almost bad ego because they have something they need to do in the world? I mean, we could think about political examples would be huge for this too, right? It's like, do you? Well, like, how do we deal with that?
I mean, you have somebody with a overinflated ego, but with what comes with that is that charisma. It's, I hate to say it, but it's like, Donald Trump. He's got this huge following. He's horrible, but he's got this huge following of people. And the bottom line is
huge, great, the biggest ever.
And, but he's got that charisma. This is what people see in him. I personally don't see it, but I mean, there are tons of people who do. So yeah, I think there are people who have this overinflated ego. Even if it's a bad lesson to teach to the world, it's the lesson. I think that's what Donald Trump is. He's the lesson to the world. don't be like this person, but it's that overinflated ego, that charisma. This is, bigger than life personality. And yes, I think that, maybe they're like that. Maybe they are bringing something to the rest of us that we need to see, even if it's just to avoid it.
Yeah. What do you think, Ellie? Do you think some people just need that kind of journey of exploding a little bit because they are exploding something into the world?
Maybe. I kind of pictured it more like martyrdom or personal sacrifice, that they were warped in some way and they did some sort of act in the end, maybe killed themselves but saved 100 people. I know that's kind of perverted, but just my feeling was, I felt like it was like you have a devolved ego, so then you have to do something really big in a role, as the counterbalance to that.
I'm thinking of like a folkloric example of like a tribe or a group of people putting a ton of energy into a person because they're going to go in the front of the battle. Right.
Like
and that person's probably going to die, right? Like, but we're putting a ton of hope and a ton of like authority and power into a person, and maybe it does inflate their ego, but they're doing it for a greater purpose. Right. Like, is that something?
That's what I felt. Okay. That was the energy that I felt like of it. Someone who maybe chose to sacrifice themselves or be a leader or a role model and then perished in the end. Maybe even the sacrifice king.
I'm thinking of Joe Biden in that situation. Just
That's a
like
good example.
Whether he was forced to or not, he did it, didn't he?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, stepping aside to, I don't know. I can't say for certain that he did it for only for the greater good of the country, but he did step aside and let someone more that was younger, maybe had more stamina than he did, to take over. So yeah, I think he kind of like he kind of sacrificed himself for the country.
So people were talking about early signs, and so I'm going to work this into a question. We'll start with you, Ellie. What are some of the earlier signs of somebody's ego getting out of control? We all know the big ones, like they're taking over the group, they're being loud, they're being insane. But like, are there smaller things you notice in the beginning with a student where you're like, this is going to be a problem?
Probably talking about themselves more and more, interrupting others more often, and I think just an increase in asserting themselves into things or talking back or correcting other people. Slightly irritating, and it gets worse. And I think it goes faster and faster until everyone stabs you with pins in the doll and you leave.
Tracy, what about you? Are there little things you notice in the beginning that make you think somebody might be a problem?
Little things, yes. Not participating, not, you're sitting there and everybody's discussing what kind of work we're going to be doing, or, a book or whatever it is. And they're just sitting there, and yeah, you could say this person is like a little timid or, just shy at first. But when it goes on for, an extended period of time, then you're thinking to yourself, okay, this person is not right for this. And that's hard. It's hard that, you don't want to tell somebody, hey, listen, I know you've put in whatever X amount of time into this, but you're just not right for this tradition. And I got to tell you, we've done that a few times, like over the last 2 years, like where we just told people, this is not right for you. Or someone who would just like, start an argument with, one of my initiates because they felt they knew too much. Don't talk down to me. I already know this. And I'm like, well, no, you don't. You've only been involved in the craft of the last 3 years. So, and you're not a gardenerian. So, yeah, there's been times where you just have to say, for the good of the coven. And that's how I always look at all of this. Is this person going to be right for the coven? How is their personality going to impact the coven as a whole? And if I start seeing red flags, before I would just be like, well, let's give them time and see how it works out. But after a while, I was like, I'm done, And right now, I have to say, I have to shout out to my coven. We have a really tight, very connected coven, and I love them. We all love each other. We work very well together. So we're keeping it really close. We're just not even considering a lot of new students at this point because we like us the way we are. We don't want to screw it up. We know we can do that. So yeah, there's definitely red flags that I look for when I'm, when we're working with students. And, right now we're good. But, it hasn't always been that way.
Yeah.
Knock on wood, we're good.
Brian, are there small things that you notice in the beginning that let you know somebody's going to have a problem with their ego?
The problem with this question is it's sort of a nuanced question. So my first thought on this is it's in regards to training, when they don't embrace the culture. When you notice they don't embrace the verbiage, they don't embrace our ways of doing things. They sort of are resistant to that. But that's about the training. Ego, I've had very few people that's been a huge issue with. It would be, they already know everything, and they don't ask questions. They don't participate. They don't want to be involved. I haven't had that happen in quite some time. So, which is probably why my idea was more about people who don't embrace the culture. And I even take that down to verbiage, because you'll notice some people are resistant and they want to use one of the things Levi and I have discussed quite a lot. And we see this in a lot of American and Gardnerian initiates, some of whom run covens, that they've embraced a lot of Llewellyn world, and it's like the published books have sort of sunk into their practice and become part of their practice and part of their verbiage. So I'd like to think, or I know, that we don't follow that course. We're actually connected to the original Alexandrian culture through the training of Val Hughes and the guidance of Maxine Sanders. But we've embraced it. 3 of us on here have embraced it. I don't know if Levi's encountered this in his coven, but in mine, I have encountered people who couldn't pick up the verbiage or the culture very quickly, and a year later, they're still using New Age Llewellyn type verbiages that we would never say, in our circles. I don't know if that makes sense.
I haven't had it. I will say the tiniest one is sometimes if they have a pagan background, I do teach that, we don't call it Lunasad, and if you do, I'm going to say, you mean Lamas, right? It's like, I do correct, because I agree with you. I think it's important to maintain the culture of a language, right? Like a shared language. So I do sometimes nitpick, because if I have students who had experience, studying paganism on their own or witchcraft on their own, they use words that I just don't use as an Alexandrian priest. And so I do correct that. But I will say I've been very lucky. I don't have that kind of problem in my coven right now. My students are really open and they're hungry to learn. And so I haven't had that issue. But I will say I have a huge red flag to me is false humility.
Ooh, yeah.
Which is a poisonous thing.
In all the religions.
Yes. That sort of, I'm so sorry. It's like, oh, poor me. I'm just here to teach. I didn't do it that well. Because they're fishing for compliments or fishing for more praise or whatever all the time. I think that's always a sign of a bad ego. If you're good at something, just be good at it. We all know who makes the best bread. We all know who does the best drawing down. It just is what it is. And then we hope that everybody can grow. But false humility is ugly. I hate that on people.
There's another one that says something seeking.
I feel called out.
No.
You do not have false humility. You're very firm in your beliefs and stuff. But false humility is something that drives me insane.
You used to say I was humble like a Borgia Pope.
Yeah, you're humble like like Alexander Borgia, like a Medici.
Virtue signaling.
Virtue signaling is part of that as well.
Same thing. Yeah, that's a red flag. I don't like that in the personality.
Yeah, it's
and going back to what Ellie said about excuses. I mean, I can't do this. It's just my astrological sign. I'm an Aries, so I can't do it this way. Or no.
I wrote a book on astrology, and I think that's nonsense.
It is nonsense.
I'm sorry,
it's just my Aries personality, or I had this bad experience with this other group that I was in. Okay,
I can never be on time. I'm a Pisces, or I can never be on time. I'm a Capricorn. Whatever. That's
exactly.
not a thing.
Exactly.
That's not a thing.
Well, it's just this. It's my ADHD. I can't, I don't know. Maybe I'm getting old and jaded. It's like.
No one's ever done any of this to me, probably because no.
I'm very lucky. I love my students. I'm very lucky. I have students who are very, very hungry to learn, and they're very open to the idea of like.
I did have a student try to pull the empath thing on me once, Levi.
Oh,
Not going to name who he is, but it didn't go over well.
I feel what you're feeling. That's a form.
No, she was having conflict with another member of the coven, and she was saying it was because she was an empath, so she could feel their negative emotions. Mm. And I said, well, I think empaths are just overly emotional psychics, and you just need to get control of yourself. Don't hear about it.
I just call them straight up crazy. That's what I call the empaths. I say, let me see your hands. Oh, God, I said, you've got crazy hands. Yeah, you're an empath, all right. You're also nuts.
It's just people who are like, their consciousness is revolving around emotions. It's not a special psychic power. They're just emotional people who they want to read psychically that way because they're emotional.
I also think that's a form. I want to say, like, real quick, something you just said, Brian, I think is so important. That's a form of a toxic ego, though. A lot of people use that whole empath thing, or I'm a psychic thing, or my guides told me not to like you, or
I'm feel bad because I'm an empath.
Exactly. Or what Tracy's talking about.
You're stupid.
Or like the whole thing about like it's in my chart, you wouldn't understand. No, I definitely would understand. I can tell you, I promise you I would understand. But like, I think it's like it's a control thing, isn't it? Have you seen that, Ellie? Like with those, because you've talked about this on the show before.
They come in my booth,
and they're trying to control it. Ugh. It's an ego thing, right? It's cloaked in this. Oh, poor me! I'm a martyr for the cause because the gods have made me an empath and a healer. But in real life, they're like it's a way to control. Because they're trying to shut down everything and like take control of the conversation.
It just draws a lot of attention back to them, and I think there's that's the red flag too, is when they talk about themselves all the time, or they constantly refer back to their own experience, or they say, "Oh, let me tell you the way I saw it," and I'm just thinking to myself, why am I sitting here? Why are you paying me to listen to you tell me what you think or feel? That's the worst, though. I'm a real anti-feeler. Keep that to yourself.
When Christine and I were running the New Orleans coven, we used to tease the initiates that they were being raised by wolves. But I think it's worse with me and Ellie because now they're being raised by Vulcans. We're just like...
Well, we are trying to create a tremendous amount of energy in our circles, and that does include emotion, because you have to have devotion and passion and deep love for the gods and the work.
That's on fire. That's private. That's right? In the circle. But we all go on fire, crazy emotion. But outside of that, you should have control over your emotions.
Control over your emotions, I think, is just really imperative, and exhibit them correctly. Yeah, imperative.
I think that's the first time we've used a Star Trek narrative instead of a Star Wars one.
Boom, boom.
Things are changing. So we're nearing the end, so I thought I'd pick a good one to end on for everyone, and something that we could do maybe quicker, as a quicker answer. So, let me see. Or if anybody on the panel has one, interrupt me. Ego and personal experience in the craft.
I just think personally, egos are fun to watch. I mean, that's kind of the storyline.
But we did that question. Is there another question?
No, actually, there's none at the end. So is there any you want to end on, Brian, or do you want to go ahead and...
Yes, I want to first ask Tracy. Tracy, I know that witchcraft isn't in your financial world, but you do run a coven,
right?
And you are involved in facilitating the religion of witchcraft as a high priestess, as a priestess.
Yes.
And where can people find you? How can they connect to you? What is it that you're facilitating right now? I know you said you aren't overly eager to accept students at the moment, but what if somebody was seeking? Tell us about your coven, where they do.
Our teaching group is called Circle of the Awakened Forest. And we are accepting students. They have to have at least some kind of knowledge of the Gardnerian tradition. They have to understand that we are a traditional coven. I teach the way everything was passed down to me, unchanged from the way it came down from Gerald Gardner. And, we're accepting students, and everybody's welcome. We don't discriminate. As long as you're coming with an open heart and you're truly sincere in learning and wanting to be initiated, we're good.
Right, and how do they contact you?
Hearts333@AOL.com. That's it comes directly to
You're still using AOL. That's like,
yes, I'm still using AOL.
Realize it, but the Long Island line, and this is a bit in my first book, Initiation to Witchcraft, but this is actually true. The Long Island line of witchcraft was the first witchcraft line to be on the internet, and it was AOL, and they really monopolized AOL at the time. Anyway, thank you so much, Tracy, for coming on the show. So we will
Thank you for having me. And I'm going to see you all in 2 weeks, and I'm so excited.
We're all going to be, for those of you who are interested, we're all going to be at HexFest. Tracy's going to be at HexFest. We're all going to be at HexFest. So that's why we'll be taking a break, partially for Kaylin's sanity, because she's got to help organize this event. So we will be taking a break until after HexFest. And then we will resume after that. Our next guest will be Christian Day. He will be our ambush interviewer. He doesn't know that yet, but now he does. Because I'm still creating a lineup, and we've been really busy finishing off my book and getting all those things together. So I didn't really arrange anyone else, so I decided it was going to be him. So he will be our next ambush interviewer after HexFest. But thank you all for joining us. Please like and subscribe our YouTube, Hex Education, even if you don't watch it on there. It helps generate interest in the channel, because most people don't look at Facebook as an archive for this content. So we've been going now for several years, and Levi has no hope of escaping anytime soon. So anyway, thank you, everyone.